Hello, good evening, good morning, good day to you all. Oh my God, I'm exhausted. We had a get together with some friends across the hill tonight, so I've just driven back. Um, Quite an interesting, lovely evening with some beloved friends, but by the end of the evening, everybody was smashed except me. So it's a bit like falling off a cruise ship and washing up on the island of misfit toys. Everybody understood each other except I couldn't figure out what they were doing at all or talking about. And everybody was in the, like, oh, I love you so much, man, phase of things, but which is fine, except like the 19th time that people go, yeah, something I really love you, man. Or start to tell the same story or whatever again for like the fourth time. And I'm going, can we talk about? I mean, we did hear this. No, we did. That kind of thing. Anyway, so I'm back. I'm back. I'm back. I'm exhausted and fuzzy, but I'm here. And that's what matters because, as they say, 90% of life is showing up. So I'm here, and you're all going to have to deal with me. Um, anyway, so yeah, no, I mean, I had to drive back over the hill, so obviously I wasn't drinking. Not that I ever drink much anyway. So but it was lovely to see these particular friends that we haven't been able to see lately. We haven't seen all through the whole COVID thing, so that was a great pleasure. And I'm glad everybody else had so much fun. I had fun seeing them, but as I said, at a certain point, it's like everybody else drifts off into slightly fuzzy land. And I'm going, I really do have to leave. I'm so sorry, but I might have to take my wife and leave. Anyway, so hello, everybody. We are here. We are still hanging in. Two of our young people are down in Southern California this weekend doing fun things, presumably, although I haven't heard much from them so far, but as far as I know, they're doing fun things. Other two young people were on dog duty tonight. That's DUTY, dog duty, meaning having to humor our extremely people-centric dogs because so many of their pack had left the house, and so when we came home, there was a great deal of whimpering and leaping and licking and stuff like that. You'd think we'd been, in the Antarctic and something instead of just being gone for the evening. But we're back. I'm back. You're here. Everybody's here. So we can go forward. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to talk about. No, I think I told you guys last week what I was working on, which is getting all the books ready. Um, Not a great deal of information there because if I tell you anything about what I'm working on, I will be giving things away that will then not be surprises when they happen in the books. So that's what I'm doing. I'm working on the new books. Excuse me. And yeah, not a lot of interesting things to say, particularly. So let me just quickly say hello to everybody. And maybe we'll get an early start on reading, and who knows, I may actually just pitch over sideways partway through and have to stop because it has been a long day. And yeah, I just drove back an hour over the hills, windy roads, etc., etc. So my brain is shot. I am mush. From the neck up, it's all fluff. Anyway, so hello, James. Hello, good to see you. Leah, good to see you too. Olaf, as always, my friend, a pleasure. And Mark Redmond, good evening, good morning, good whatever it is where you are. Wouter, good to see you. A rainy good morgen from you and from Iris. And I send back to you and with thanks. Hello, Ron. Yes, the revisions are coming along well, and I'm so grateful for what everybody has contributed as far as that goes. Andre, hello. Good to see you. I'm so glad I was able to be of some assistance to you by reading. Anyway, I hope your eyes are healing up well and everything is good now. Dirk, hello, back from holiday, and I'm happy to have you back with me. Christine, hello. Very nice to see you too. And I'm glad Berlin is sunny. And I'm glad to see you here. Kristen, hello. As always, good to see you. And Carol, same thing. Good morning. Jessica, hello from California to northern Germany. Yes, everything is fine at Casa Williams Beale. My wife Deborah, who is of course the Beale half of the Williams Beale, had an extremely good night tonight. She had a lot of fun. And there's Hazel, Deborah's mother, and my mother-in-law. Good morning, sweetie. Lovely to see you. Thanks for checking in. Your daughter had way too good a time, and oh my God, your daughter is a party monster. But we'll talk about that some other time. It's pretty entertaining with everybody else being party monsters, except for me sitting there going, I can't understand a word these people are saying. Anyway, Jeremy, good morning or night. Is it Saturday or Sunday? You know, that's the whole thing with this 2 a.m. thing. It's Sunday, but I never have done it by going to sleep first. So I'm always up from Saturday. So it feels like Saturday to me. Cliff, hello, good to see you. A pleasure. Yes, the family, as far as I know, are doing well. As I said, two of them are out from under parental control at the moment, trotting around in Southern California. So I'm very happy to be here, Christine. No need to thank me. And Lalani, hello. Lovely to see you. And rather gray morning in England. Now that's a shocker. A gray morning in England. Who would ever have thought of such a thing? Actually, one of the things I loved about being in England is I am not a sun guy. Despite having grown up in California, I am not a guy who likes a lot of sun. I don't go to the beach and never have. I have this super pale skin, which I have learned a long time ago cannot take more than 10 or 15 minutes of sun before it starts to literally frizzle like bacon. So as a result, I was very happy in England. And when it rained all the time, I was like, okay, so I'm going to be inside working, no problem. And when I did decide to go out, it was always cool and gray, and I never had to feel like, oh God, it's too bright, it's too hot. I was really happy in England. I think that probably, well, not just probably, certainly what I've been able to find out, my genetic background is all Northern European, out at the Celtic fringes. So the Celtic and the Teutonic fringes. So, you know, my personal genetic heritage, as far as we know, from having a test, you know, doing the sort of genetic testing and stuff, and what I know of my family's actual history, is all Northern European on the edges. So Northern Germany, like Bremen and places like that. Scandinavia specifically, I know for sure Norway. Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. So as you can see, my people come from the fringes of civilization where they were driven. We are small, hairy, and mean, but you know, we're also poets. So that's our background. Anyway, so lovely to see you all. So yes, Lulani. So I'm glad that that you're here, and I'm sorry it's gray, but I also kind of miss the grayness. Jessica, no more noble duty than dog duty. Yeah, and you can believe that our dogs think that is very important. They cannot understand why we ever leave the house, to be honest with you, except for when we take them out for walks. And they're shocked when we leave, and when we come back, they're delighted because they were certain we were dead. Because, you know, I mean, why else would we not immediately come back in the second we step outside, unless we had been killed? David, hello. Pleasure to see you. When do I plan to hit the con scene again? Well, probably not, unless there's something local that happens. Probably not until about February, which is, that'll probably be the earliest I can start thinking about going anywhere, because I have literally just 7 days a week until February I'm going to be writing. But after that, it would be fun to get out and see people again. So I promise you that I will put all these things on the website when I next plan to, or am asked to go somewhere. Ron, did I say hello to you already, Ron? I think I did. Hello, good to see you as always. Herty, hello, nice to have you with me. James is checking in. Leah was checking in with quantum superposition, says Leah. And I'm not even sure what she's responding to here, but it's absolutely true. Because the whole great thing about quantum superposition is everything is true all the time. And I think that's it in terms of catching up with everybody. And lovely to have you here. I am about to start. I'm not even going to try and synopsize because my brain, as I think I may have mentioned earlier several times, is utter mush. And that means I'm saying and a lot. That's what happens when my brain is mush. Anything else, though, that I wanted to talk to people about? Nah, not really. I can't think of anything. As I said, right now I'm in survival mode, so I'm just going to try to get through the reading without completely going sideways. So, again, this is I'm sober. I am completely sober. I had one glass of wine stretched out over a very nice meal. So this is not sobriety. I'm not in sobriety. This is just exhaustion and brainlessness. It's been a long last couple of days for a variety of reasons. Nothing bad, just, work and domestic hurry and rush and bother and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so the last thing that we had just read, Matty Tinwright, the poet, or at least the self-professed poet, has left the castle proudly now that he is an official court poet, which those of you who have been listening to the story know how that happened. But it was in large part because he was introduced by the potboy Gil, who has prophetic dreams, and was taken to Berwick and Bryony. So on his way into town to the Quiller's Mint, to his tavern of choice, where he hangs out with the other poets, he ran into Puzzle, the jester, the ancient jester, and Puzzle wound up sinking into the mud of the main road because it's rainy and muddy. And that was the last we saw, is that he was just barely saved from getting run over by an ox cart. And Puzzle his mud well up himself. And that's where we ended it. Says, the ox lowered its head and stared at the blinking, mud-slathered jester as though it had never seen such a strange creature. And that's where we're starting again. It was not the entrance that Tinwright had planned, so it was just as well that his old haunt, the Quiller's Mint, was dark and crowded, and scarcely anyone even glanced up to see them come in. Actually, before I go any further, let me push this in, and I will move closer. There we go. I will move closer to the screen and all of that stuff. Yeah, that'll work. Okay. It was not the entrance that Tinwright had planned, so it was just as well that his old haunt, the Quiller's Mint, was dark and crowded, and scarcely anyone even glanced up to see them come in. A trio of outland soldiers laughed at the brown shell hardening on Puzzle's lower extremities, but made a little room for the shivering old man as Tinwright deposited him beside the fire. He snagged the potboy as he ran past. A child of 9 or 10 had replaced Gil, he noticed, doubtless one of Connery's multitude of relatives, but young enough not to have become work-shy yet, and bade the boy bring a brush and some rags to get off the worst of the mud. This done, Tinwright sauntered up to the serving table where Connery was breeching a cask. It was a real table now, not just a trestle board. The poet couldn't help being impressed and a little irritated. The coming siege had brought some good to someone, as the crowd of unfamiliar drinkers gathered in the Quiller's Mint proved, but it did take a bit of the luster off Tinwright's own advancement in the world. Let's see if I can tilt that down a little bit. Sorry, we've got a slightly weird angle. There, that's better. Where were we? But it did take a bit of the luster off Tinwright's own advancement in the world. Connery's look was sour, but it took in the huge ruff of the new jacket. Tinwright, you whoreson, you stole my potboy. Stole him? Not I. Rather, it was him that nearly got me banged up in the stronghold under the keep. But good has come of it, so I do not begrudge him. I am the Princess Regent's poet now. He examined a stool and wiped it with a kerchief before sitting down. A princess gone deaf, then, has she? Poor girl, as if she didn't have troubles enough. Connery put his hands on his hips. And if you're riz so high in the world, you can bloody well pay me them 3 starfish you owe me, or I'll have the town watching to pitch you into the street again. Tinwright had forgotten about that and couldn't help making a face, but he had come flush today, thanks to the money he had borrowed from Puzzle, and he did his best to move the coins ungrudgingly from his purse to the tabletop. Of course, I was detained at the pleasure of the Regent, you see, or else I would have been back to pay you long ago. Connery looked at the coppers as though for the first time, new ruff and quilted jacket notwithstanding, he might consider believing in Tinwright's exalted new position. Are you drinking, then? Aye, and my companion is the king's own royal jester, so you would do well to bring a jug of your best ale over to the fire. None of that rubbish you give everyone else. He waved his hand grandly. Another starfish, then, said Connery, because them 3 are mine, remember? Tinwright grunted. Was he not clearly now worthy of credit, but disdainfully dropped another coin on the tabletop. Puzzle appeared to have thawed out a bit, although he had abandoned the scraping of his soiled hose and slippers with quite a bit of mud still on them, and was staring into the fire as though trying to imagine what such a fascinatingly hot and shiny thing might be called. Now, is this not better than trying to find a place to drink in the castle kitchens? Tinwright asked him loudly, with the soldiers elbowing and shoving like geese fighting for grain. Puzzle looked up. I think I have been in this place before, long ago. It burned down, didn't it? Tinwright waved his hand. Aye, many years back, or so I'm told. It is a low place, but it has its charms. A poet must drink with the common folk, or else he will lose himself from too much contemplation of high things. So I sometimes came here before I was raised up. He looked around to see if anyone had noted his remarks, but the outlanders by the fire were playing at dice and paying no attention. Well, well. A jug of ale and 2 tankards clanked down onto the hearth at their feet, and Puzzle's eyes bulged at the expansive bosom revealed by the woman bending over. She straightened up. Matty Tinwright, I thought you were dead, or gone back to West Warpside. He gave Bridget his most amiable nod. No, I have had other duties that have kept me away. She pinched at his jacket, let a finger trail across his starched ruff. Seems you've come high in the world, Matty. This was more like it. He smiled and turned to Puzzle. You see, they remember me here. The old man didn't appear to be listening very closely. His weak eyes were following the quiver of flesh above Bridget's bodice like a starving man eyeing a dripping roast. Tinwright turned back to the girl. Yes, Zosim himself has smiled on me. I am now poet to the Princess Regent. The wench frowned a little, but then her own smile came back. Still, you must get a bit lonely up at the castle, even with all those fine ladies. You must miss your old friends, your old bed. Now it had become a bit much, and even though the old man was still goggling at the girl's breasts, happily oblivious, Tinwright himself didn't really want to be reminded of his previous situation. Ah, yes, he said, and though he spoke airily, he gave her a stern look. I suppose a few nights, Hughie and Theodorus and I did sleep here after having a few scoops too many. Riotous times. He turned for a moment to Puzzle. We poets have a weakness for strong drink because it sets the fancy free to roam. He patted Bridget on the bum, as much to get her attention as anything else, and tried to slip her a hayfish. "Now, my girl, if you don't mind, my companion and I have important business to discuss." She stared at him and was proffered the coin. "Be a good lass, Bridget. That is your name, if I remember correctly. Yes?" Afterward, he was glad she had not been holding a mug or tray. But even the bare-handed slap on the back of the skull was enough to bring tears to his eyes and pitch his new hat into the ashes at the front of the hearth. "You dog!" she said, so loud that half the crowded tavern turned to watch. "A few days past the walls of the inner keep, and you think your pizzle is turned to solid silver? At least when Nevin Huni falls asleep on top of a girl, drooling and farting and limp as a custard, he doesn't pretend he's done her a favor." He could hear laughter from the other patrons as she flounced away, but his ears were ringing from the blow, and their jibes were no louder in his throbbing head than the noise of a distant river. With a few tankards of ale in his belly, even the watery piss that Connery sold at the Mint, Puzzle had become positively animated. But I thought you said the other day that you were commanded to go with the soldiers," the old man asked, wiping a thin line of froth from his lips. "To be a war poet or some such." Much of the good cheer had gone out of him now, but Tinwright did his best. "Oh, that. I spoke of it to the Castellan. Lord Naynor, his name is?" "Naynor." Puzzle frowned a little. "Not a mirthful fellow. Never been able to make him laugh. Thinks too much, I suppose." "Yes, well, I was eager to go, of course. But Naynor felt I would be of more use if I stayed here, to lift up the spirit of the princess, with her brother away and all." In actuality, it had been Naynor who had come to him to make arrangements. He had heard of Princess Bryony's offhand commission through some source Tinwright could not even guess, and Tinwright had gone down on his knees, even wept a little, swearing that it was all a mistake, that someone had misunderstood one of Bryony's offhand remarks. Naynor had said he would have to speak with her himself, but that had been days ago, and the Prince Regent and the army had ridden out since then, so Tinwright felt he was now fairly safe. Still, even thinking about it, he could barely restrain a shudder. Matty Tinwright going to war against monsters and giants, and the gods alone knew what else. It didn't even bear thinking about. No, his smooth skin and handsome face were suited only for battles of the more intimate kind, the sort that took place in beds and secluded hallways, and from which both combatants walked away unharmed. "I asked to go," Puzzle suddenly proclaimed. "They've no use for me here, those two, not like their father. There was a good man. He understood my jokes and tricks." In a moment he had gone from chucklingly cheerful to teary-eyed. They say he's still alive, King Olin, but I fear he will never come back. Ah, that good man. And now this war and all." He looked up, blinking. "Who are we fighting? Fairies? I understand none of it." "Nobody does," Tinwright said, and here he was again on firm ground. "The rumor mongers are running mad even in the castle, so who knows what they are saying out in the city?" He pointed to a group of men standing over a table, smoking long pipes and sharing a broadsheet. "Do you know what that scurrilous pamphlet claims? That the Princess Regent and her brother have murdered Galen Tully, the Duke of Summerfield." He shook his head, genuinely angry. To think that someone would speak such calumnies of the lovely young woman who had recognized Tinwright's quality and raised him up from the undeserved muck of places like this to the heights for which he was meant. He shook his head and downed the remains of his fourth or fifth tankard. He would have liked another, but Bridget was still serving, and he dared not call her over again. Puzzle was looking around, too. She's very pretty, that girl. Bridget? Yes, pretty enough, but her heels are as round as the full moon. He scowled into the lees at the bottom of his mug. Be grateful that you are past the age of such things, my good fellow. Women like that are the bane of man's existence. A night's innocent tumble, and they feel they can tie a string to your freedom and drag it around behind them like a child's toy. Past the age, Puzzle said, a little doubtfully, perhaps, or merely wistfully, then fell silent. He was quiet for such a long time that Tinwright finally looked up, thinking that the old man had fallen asleep. But instead, Puzzle's eyes were wide. Tinwright stared around, wondering if perhaps Bridget's dress had come entirely unfastened. But the old fellow was staring at the tavern door as it swung closed, shutting out the rainy afternoon. Curfew tonight, Connery shouted from behind his table on the far side of the room. Closing time is sunset bell. The jack-o'-lanterns will be here soon, so drink up, drink up. But I thought, Puzzle said slowly. What? Matty Tinwright set down his tankard, considered another drink, then tried to decide whether he would prefer a trip to the Mint's unspeakable privy or to stand in the pouring rain emptying his bladder against a wall on the way back. What is it? I just saw someone I know. Craven, the physician. The royal physician. He was talking to that man in the hood over there. Puzzle stirred. No, the one in the hood's gone, too. Maybe they went out together. What is so strange in that? A physician of all people must know the good that ale will do, the best physic of all. But he is gone. Or rather, he is not gone, obviously. Puzzle shook his head. He has left the castle, gone on a sudden journey. Everyone was surprised. Well, I suppose he has come back. Clearly he has been somewhere dire indeed, if this is the first place he visits on his return. Tinwright heaved himself up onto his feet. He was beginning to think that maybe he had drunk a bit more than he had thought. Lost count somewhere. Come, let us go back ourselves. They are a poor lot here at the Mint, despite the occasional doctor or royal poet. He helped Puzzle up. Or a king's jester, of course, he added kindly. No, they do not understand quality here. Bryony had always liked Berwick's rooms better than her own in some ways. She had the view down to the privy garden from her sitting room, and that was pretty enough, especially on sunny days. And on rainy days the doves all perched on the windowsill, murmuring, and it felt as cozy as pulling a blanket over her knees. But from her window, the stony bulk of Wolf's Tooth spire took up most of the horizon, so her view was foreshortened, limited to the local and domestic. Berwick, though, could see out across the rooftops from the small window in his dressing chamber, past the forest of chimneys and all the way to the sea. As Bryony stared out of her brother's window now, the Tower of Autumn was glinting, white and brick red, and beyond it lay the open ocean, blue-black and moody. The little storm that had just passed had left the sky sullen, but it was still heartening somehow to look out across all this space and open sky, across the roofs of the castle like mountainous small countries, and to think about how big the world was. Did they give him these rooms on purpose, because he was the son and I was the daughter? For me, the gardens, the quiet places, the old walls, to let me grow used to the idea of a life confined. But for him, this view of the world that is part of his birthright, the sky, life, and adventure, stretching out in all directions. And, of course, now her brother was riding out into that world, and she was terrified for him, but also envious. It is two separate betrayals, not only to leave me behind at all, but to leave me with the throne and all those people clamoring, begging, arguing. Still, it didn't diminish her love for him, but changed the powerful connection into something like an overfond child who wouldn't stop pestering, but could not be safely put down. Oh, and Beric is in danger if what that strange potboy said is true. But there was nothing she could do. Nothing she could do about anything except to wait and prepare for the worst. And the gods awakening, the strange man said, wouldn't explain it. What did that mean? What does any of this mean? When precisely did the whole world begin to run mad? A cloud slid past. A single ray of sunlight angled down, dazzled for a moment on the Tower of Summer, then was swallowed up in gray again. Bryony sighed and turned to her ladies. I must dress. But, Highness, said Moina, startled, these clothes are... I have told you what I will do and why. We are at war, and soon that will be more than words. My brother is gone off with the army. I am the last of the Eddens in this castle. There is your stepmother, Rose offered timidly. The child, until that baby is born, I am the last of the Eddens in Shadowmarch. Bryony heard the iron in her own voice and was amused and appalled. What am I becoming? I told you I cannot merely be myself any longer. I am my brother, too. I am my whole family. She saw the looks on her ladies' faces and made a noise of exasperation. No, I am not going mad. I know what I am doing. But do I truly? She wondered. A person can fall into a rage of grief or despair and do themselves and others harm. Other madnesses could creep into the sufferer's heart so stealthily that they did not even realize they had gone mad. Was this really just fury against the scorn of men and a desire to hold her brother close in the only way now left to her? Or was this rage against ordinary courtly dress a kind of fever that had taken her, that had gradually grown to unwoman her entirely? Oh, gods and goddesses, I ache so. They're all gone. Every day I want to weep or curse. She spoke none of this, or let any of it show on her face, except perhaps by a certain angry stiffness that silenced Rose and Moina completely. I must dress, she said again, and stood as straight as she could, as proudly upright as any queen or empress, while they began to clothe her in her brother's clothes. At the very last, the ladies pretended they could not do it, that they did not understand the working of the thing, although it was much more simple than any lady's garment. So she put on the heavy sword belt herself and buckled it tight across her hips before sliding the long blade into the sheath. If it was a weather change, it was a strange one. Vanson stood on the hillside behind the scouts and looked out across the expanse of valley at the Setland road winding along at its bottom and tried to make sense of what he felt. The air was close, but not from the nearness of any storm, although a heavy rain had swept through at midday and the road had been hard going for the rest of the afternoon. Neither was it a smell, although the air had a certain sour tang that reminded him of the burning season in autumn, of bonfires now 2 months past. Even the light seemed inexplicably strange, but for no reason he could name. The sky was darkening quickly now, the sun setting behind a slate-colored blanket of clouds, and the hillside seemed unusually green against the dark pall. But it was nothing he had not seen hundreds of times. "It's because you're afraid," he told himself. "Because you crossed that line once and you're afraid you might find yourself behind it again. Because you've seen what's coming and you're afraid to meet it." All morning and afternoon they had encountered people fleeing the rape of Candlerstown, most merely hurrying ahead of rumors of its end, but some, almost all women and children lucky enough to escape in wagons, who had actually survived its destruction. The stories of these last were particularly terrifying, and Tyne Aldrich and Vanson and the others had spent much of the afternoon trying to understand what it meant for them, vainly trying to concoct a strategy that could counter such nightmarish madness. The first few refugees' tales had so unsettled the soldiers who heard them, themselves conscripted farmers, little different from the husbands and fathers these families had so recently lost to such ghastly enemies, that with Earl Tyne's permission, Vanson had ridden ahead with a company of scouts to glean what information he could from the oncoming victims, and then give them what aid he might before turning them aside to where outliers of the army could give them food and water, hoping to prevent the dreadful stories washing repeatedly across the main body of troops like waves of freezing water. Ferris Vanson already knew this second night out from Southmarch would be a grim, anxious camp. No sense in turning it into anything worse. It was pointless, of course. Those who couldn't stand even to hear about the terrible Twilight people would probably have scant chance of surviving a battle with them. But Vanson hoped that the fact of real combat would give men back their hearts, no matter how frightened they were. Any enemy who could be touched, fought, killed, was better than the one you could only imagine. He turned to Dab Dolly, one of the survivors of his own ill-fated expedition across the Shadowline. It was only with great reluctance, and at the express order of Princess Bryony, that he had increased the responsibility of Michael Southstead, whom he didn't trust very much at all. The night he was named a captain, he had caused 2 bad fights back in Southmarch with his bragging. But young Dolly was a different story, cautious and thoughtful despite his years, and much more so since their shared adventure. Had it not been for his own desire to see what was ahead of them, Vanson would happily have let Dolly lead the scouting party himself, despite his lack of experience. "I think we stay here tonight, Dad. Or at least that is what I will suggest to Earl Tyne. Will you take the men down and start looking for water? It seems to me there should be a stream there beyond that hillock." Dolly nodded. The other scouts, wilderness veterans almost to a man, had heard the captain. There was no need for the formality of orders. They clicked softly to their mounts and started down the road. A few hundred such as these, and I might not fear even the Twilight folk, Vanson told himself. But he knew it was not true. Even standing in the midst of 1,000 of the stoutest men in the world would not thaw a freezing, terrified heart. The valley was full of fires. This close to home, they were still eating fresh meat, and bread that could be broken without having to saw at it with a knife, which was a rare pleasure on March. Some of the guardsmen from Kirkwall were playing pipes and singing. Despite the mournful Kurdish tunes, it was a pleasingly ordinary sound. Vanson was glad of it, and certain that others felt the same. He was wandering back toward the fire when he saw a figure standing at the crest of one of the low hills, inside the ring of sentries, but not near any of them. He puzzled for a moment. before he recognized it as Prince Beric. Vanson was a little surprised, thinking that the prince would have preferred to be in the midst of Lord Aldrich and the other nobles, drinking and being waited upon. But Vanson knew from his experience with the royal family that the boy had always been odd and solitary. But he's a boy no longer, I suppose. In fact, Beric was the same sort of age Vanson himself had been when he first left home to seek his fortune in the city. An age when he had been certain that he was a man, despite no confirming proof. Watching Beric, he could not help remembering Princess Bryony's fear for her brother. Certainly the lad should be safe. He was scarcely 24 yards from the nearest campfire. And Ferris Vanson had a respect for solitude that many others did not. But he couldn't help being anxious. After all, he thought, Colum Dyer was within my arm's reach when he was taken. It would be horror enough to have to tell that lovely, sad young woman that her brother had died honorably in battle. He couldn't imagine telling her that the prince had been stolen by fairies right out of camp. As he strode up the hill, the wet grass slapping at his legs, Vanson suddenly wondered what the Twilight people wanted. Although there had been few true wars during his lifetime, he had ample experience of violence and knew that there were some men who could only be stopped from taking what they wanted by strength, and some who feared that others meant to take what was theirs even when it was not true. That greed and fear lay at the bottom of most fights. But that army he had seen beyond the shadow line, that array of the sublime and terrible, that ghastly, glorious host, what could they want? Why had they left the safety of their misty lands after 2 centuries or more? A time in which their original enemies had long since disappeared, and new mortals unnumbered had been born, lived and died again, all without knowing the shadow folk as anything but the stuff of old stories and evil dreams. He fought a shudder. They were not men, nor even animals, but demons, as he knew better than anyone. So how could a mere man hope to understand their reasons? Young Beric turned at his approach and watched for a moment, before turning back to what he had been gazing at so intently. Nothing, so far as Vanson could tell. Prince Beric, your pardon. Are you well? Captain Vanson. The young man continued staring out at the night sky. The wind had herded the clouds away, and the stars had come out. Ferris Vanson couldn't help remembering how, as a small child, he had once thought they were the cook fires of people like himself, sky shepherds, perhaps, living on the other side of the great bowl of the heavens, who called the fires of the Vanson family and their neighbors stars in turn. It is getting cold, Highness. Perhaps you would be more comfortable back with the others. The prince didn't answer immediately. What was it like? He finally asked. What was it like? Behind the shadow line. Did it feel different? Smell different? It was frightening, Highness, as I told you and your sister. Misty and dark. Confusing. Yes, but what was it like? His bad arm was hidden in his cloak, but the other hand pointed at the sky. Did you see the same stars? Demia's ladder, the horns? Vanson shook his head. I can't quite remember now. It was all very much like a dream. Stars? I'm not sure. Beric nodded. I have dreams about the other side. I know that now. I've had them all my life. I didn't really know what they were, but hearing what you said about... He turned to fix Vanson with a surprisingly sharp glance. You say you were frightened. Why? Were you afraid you'd die? Or was it something else? Ransom had to stop and think for a moment. Afraid to die? Of course. The gods give us the fear of death so that we won't squander their gifts too lightly, so that we will use what is given us to the fullest. But that isn't what I felt there. That's not the whole of it, anyway. Barrack smiled, although there was something incomplete in it. So we will use what is given us to the fullest. You are a bit of a poet, Captain Vanson, aren't you? No, Highness. That is what the village priest taught me. He stiffened a little. But I think it's true. Who knows what will happen to us in Kurnios' cold hands? Yes, who indeed? Now the memories of his days in the Shadowland were seeping back, as though the lid he had put on them had been kicked loose. I was afraid because the world there was strange to me, because I could not trust my own senses, because it made me feel like a madman. And there is nothing more frightening than that. Barrack was darkly pleased by something. No, that is true, Captain Vanson. He peered at him again. Do you have a first name? Ferris, Highness. It is a common enough name in the Dales. But Vanson isn't. My father was from the Vutish Isles. Barrack had turned back to the stars again. But he made his home in Daler's Trough. Was he happy? Is he still alive? He died, Highness, years ago now. He was happy enough. He always said he would trade all the wide ocean for a crofter's patch and good weather. Perhaps he was born out of his place, said Prince Barrack. That happens, I think. Some of us live our whole lives as if we were dreaming, because we haven't found where we're meant to be. Stumbling through shadows, terrified, strangers just as you were in the Twilight Lands. He suddenly tucked his other hand under his cloak. You're right, Captain Vanson. It is getting cold. I think I will have some wine and try to sleep. The prince turned and walked down the hill. He is still a boy, really, for all his philosophy, Vanson decided as he followed several paces behind, alert for any threat, even here among the campfires. A child, clever, angry, and fearful. The gods grant that he lives long enough for some of that knowing to turn into wisdom. The murmur of disapproving conversation, which at times threatened to become a roar, had begun the moment Bryony walked into the room, and had not stopped since she took her place at the head of the table. Meals in the great hall were seldom quiet or restful, and on any other day she would have taken something quietly in her chambers. But she had decided on a brave show, and she would take what came. Hierarch Sizel sat on her right. Brone, although few others at the table outranked him, took the place on her left because he was the Lord Constable, and the castle was at war, or soon to be so. The hierarch, after an initial widening of the eyes and pursing of the lips when he saw her, had made polite conversation just as though she were wearing proper womanly clothing. She was not certain whether she admired this or disliked it. Brone was disgusted, of course, but she had come to know him well enough to feel certain that his annoyance had more to do with her making what he considered an unnecessary spectacle of herself at a delicate time than any particular disapproval of this provocative unsexing. The Lord Constable had other things on his mind he deemed more important, and he clearly meant to use the stir over the arrival of the main courses to speak to her. As the chicken carcasses were carried away, and the huge half-bullock, sweating in its own juices, was carted in, surrounded by what, to Bryony's taste, was an overly festive array of peacocks, roasted, and then dressed again in their own feathers. The dogs barked excitedly and snuffled in the rushes for dropped bones. She reached down and scratched a furry head, glad somebody here was deservedly happy anyway. The work on the fortifications is largely done, Rowan told her quietly, but the strongest walls will not hold if the hearts inside are weak. The nobles are restive. Several have gone already, preferring to take their chances in their own homes, or even to take the sea lanes if things seem to go badly. I know. She had granted enough spurious requests in the last days, thin excuses that she felt certain she could pull to tatters in an instant if she chose. Let them go, Lord Brown. Those are not the folk we'll want at our sides if things do grow worse, rather than merely seem bad as they do now. She glanced down at Hendon Tolly and his sister-in-law, Elan, halfway down the table, but in a different world, surrounded by admirers like Durston Crowell, the Baron of Greylock, all but the girl laughing broadly at one of Tolly's jokes. In truth, it's too bad they do not all leave. Southmarch might be harder to defend, but the waiting would be more pleasant. But that is just the thing. Rowan leaned back and waited for one of the squires to drop a slice of beef onto his trencher. For every faint-hearted noble that rides off south or sets sail to the east, he said when the youth had moved on, a retinue of men-at-arms goes with him, and we can scarcely afford to lose a one of them. Bryony waved her hand. What could she do? One could not compel love, she had decided, especially not for the child when it was the father who had earned it. All the faces that had come before her, mouthing reasons why they were urgently needed on the family lands, or promising to return with a fresh muster of troops, had begun to look as distant and dead as the likenesses in the portrait hall. But she would remember them if one day the sun shone on Southmarch again. She would recall who left, and she would most certainly recall who stayed, and she would punish and reward them accordingly. She owed that to her father and Kendrick, now that they were helpless to protect this place both had loved so much. She was startled to realize that she had been thinking about her father again as though he were dead. She made the sign of pass evil, something she had scarcely done since childhood when she learned it from one of her nursemaids. He is well, she told herself. I will write him another letter tonight, send it out with a courier on a ship going south. She felt a wash of shame. I have told him nothing of this coming war, if that's what it is, and only the barest details of Kendrick's death. But was this sort of news to send to a man in prison, that his kingdom stood threatened, and so strangely? Even prisoned in Hyrosol, he would have heard about Kendrick, and of Shazo's imprisonment, whether or not he had received her last letter. Was that not heartache enough? She suddenly missed her father so badly, she found it hard to breathe. Barrett, too. She wished her twin were beside her now, that they could escape together later to discuss all these yawning, greasy-mouthed courtiers. Lady Comfrey Menil, with her hair already half done after drinking too much wine. Fat Lord Bratchard, who saw himself against all evidence as a wit and a ladies' man, who used to paw Bryony's hair and face when she was small and tell her what a pretty young woman she was growing to be. I hope that if this castle falls, the Twilight people take the lot of them and march them off to Vanson foggy shadowlands with chains around their necks. It was a stunningly uncharitable thought, and ignored the many kind and good hearts around her, but at this moment the shout of conversation and clanking of cups and knives seemed little better than the clamor of the barnyard, and these people, for all their finery, little better than pigs shoving to reach the trough. Hierarch Sizel was trying to say something to her, but at that moment a loud bray of laughter from handsome, stupid Durston Crowell pricked at her like a needle, and she flinched. The Baron of Greylock was roaring at something that Hendon Tolly had said, laughing so hard that he choked on his wine and sprayed some on his ruff and down his front, occasioning fresh laughter from the others around him. The author of the remark met her eyes, his lips drawn in a satisfied smile. She knew, or felt certain she did, who was the butt of Hendon Tolly's jest. "Lord Tolly," she called, "like Arilo, putting a blessing on the grape harvest, it seems you are bringing much needed mirth to our table tonight, when otherwise people might be sitting quiet and thoughtful, wondering what the gods have in store for us." Beside her, Brone cleared his throat, and on the other side, the hierarch tried his remark again, some innocuous comment about how all the fortification work had made him think about some additions to the temple, but she was paying neither of them any attention. She and Hendon Tolly had locked eyes. She was waiting for his reply, and now others were too. A few dogs beneath the table were growling, playing tug-of-war with a bone, but otherwise the room had grown remarkably still. "It is a credit to your hospitality, Princess Bryony, that you provide us many diversions. You have given us so many interesting things to think about that I had almost forgotten that I am mourning the loss of my brother, Duke Galen." "Yes, we have all been saddened by Galen's disappearance," she said, ignoring another warning cough from Avon Brone. "It was especially a blow because his departure from this house followed so soon after the death of my own brother." A palpable unease had fallen over the table. Even Crowell, who had been ready to laugh, sat with his mouth open, surprised. "We are all unhappy," Avon Brone said loudly, "to have lost two such noble men so close together. Well, we can only pray that Lord Tolly's brother comes back to us safe." Tolly raised an eyebrow and smiled a little, content to wait and see which way she would take this, whether she would acknowledge Brone's offered flag of truce. His self-confidence was itself an insult. Bryony found it maddening that he should feel so secure as to bandy words with the reigning princess in her own hall at her own table, and then leave it to her to grasp for peace if she wished. She did not wish. Not tonight. And that's where I'm going to stop because there's a lot of scene left. And there's no point getting too far into it. That's a pretty good place to stop. So I made it. I made it through, which is really actually something, excuse me, that I wasn't certain I would do when I started. But I appreciate all of you and your patience. And I thank you for joining me. For those of you who are in a similar time zone or whatever, or at least a compatible time zone, I will continue with that scene at the 7 p.m. reading coming up some hours from now. For those of you who cannot, it will, of course, as these readings always are, be available on both on my social media sites, Facebook and Twitter, but also on YouTube as well and on tadwilliams.com. Again, those of you who are interested who have not already been there, I recommend the tadwilliams.com site and especially the message board, which is full of lovely people, some of whom are here at these readings, many others who for various reasons are not, but are still very much worth meeting. And with that, I run out of things to say that will make any sense whatsoever, which means it's time to put myself horizontal, or at least to start in that general direction. So again, I thank you. Be good to yourselves, be good to your loved ones, be good to those around you, and we will gather at the river again very soon. and do stuff. So until then, good night, good morning, ciao, and I'll see you real soon. Peace.